What's going on, Bottom Line viewers? It's Mitch here of the Bottom Line View, back with another NFL Stardom and Situm for week number 3 of the NFL season. We're already in week number 3, which means in fantasy terms that we're starting to see trends and we're starting to see what players are going to be good for your fantasy team and what players you need to get rid of, cut, trade, or whatever it may be. But week number 3, you start to see the players that are going to be stars and start to see the players that are going to be duds for your fantasy team. In this video, of course, if you've never been to the Bottom Line View and watched one of these NFL Stardom and Situm videos, I'll give you 5 starts and 5 sits at every position, including the quarterback, running back, wide receiver, and tight end position. Let's get right into the video. So, let's start off with the quarterback position and the starts for the quarterback position. And where else are we going to start but the quarterback that plays the New York Jets? Jay Cutler looked pretty good. He looked pretty good, guys, last week against the LA Chargers. And the LA Chargers defense, I don't know if you guys really know this, but they're not that bad. They have a pretty good pass defense. They have some pretty good corners, some pretty good defensive ends, and a good pass rush. And what do the Jets have? They have none of that. So, therefore, Jay Cutler should be able to pass the ball in this game against the Jets. He has Jarvis Landry. We saw the connection between those two guys. Hint, hint, hint. We will see Jarvis Landry later in this video. But Jay Cutler against the Jets with Jarvis Landry. Devontae Parker should be playing. He had a connection with Kenny Stills. Their run game's very solid with Jay Ajayi. The offensive line is pretty solid. Cutler has the weapons, he has the offensive line, and he has the offensive mind in Adam Gase to get things done against the New York Jets this week, to just plop right in there in your lineup for a quick little stream this week if you're in need. The next start I have is Cam Newton versus the New Orleans Saints. Again, like the New York Jets, whoever plays the Saints is most likely a start. Yes, Cam Newton's looked like absolute crap in the first 2 weeks of this season and for your fantasy team. And if you've been watching these videos, you should have sat him. But anyways, Cam Newton against the Saints should be a no-brainer start. The Saints have given up an average of 388 passing yards in 2 weeks. Yes, they played Tom Brady, but they also gave up monster yardage to Sammy Biscuit, Sam Bradford. This week, Cam Newton is at home. Yes, he lost Greg Olsen, but the Saints don't have enough talent in the secondary or in the linebacking core to really disrupt Cam Newton's game. Cam should be able to hit guys like Benjamin, Funches, who came on a little bit last week, and especially Christian McCaffrey in this matchup, and be able to slice and dice the Saints all day long. Plus, if the Saints are able to move the ball a little bit through the air, that will make even more incentive for Cam Newton to put up more fantasy points for your fantasy team. My third start is actually Ben Roethlisberger versus the Chicago Bears. Now, typically, I stay away from Ben on the road, and I still think this game is going to be a little closer than people expect. But Ben Roethlisberger against the Chicago Bears, who are a solid front seven, but they have no talent in the secondary. This is going to be a Big Ben game through and through. Big Ben and the Steelers have not been able to establish the run with Le'Veon Bell thus far this season. I think this falls on Ben's shoulders. I think Martavis Bryant, who had a big game last week, is going to have another one this week. Antonio Brown's going to have a huge game after being frustrated by Xavier Rhodes of the Vikings last week. I just look at the Steelers' passing game versus Chicago's secondary. It's a mismatch waiting to happen, and I look at Big Ben as a very, very good start this week, even on the road in Chicago. My next start is Alex Smith versus the Los Angeles Chargers. If you actually look at Alex Smith's statistics against the Chargers, he's done a very good job these last couple of years and slicing and dicing this secondary. We also just got a report that Jason Verrett is going to be out long-term for the Chargers, which is not good news for them. That guy, man, that sucks for him because he is a really good player, and the Chargers are really going to miss him. But Alex Smith has looked good thus far this season. You know, he did have a little bit of a downer against the Eagles, but the Eagles' defensive line was absolutely in his face all day. Now, the Chargers do have pass rushers themselves, but with Alex Smith this week. He's been extremely accurate, extremely safe to play in your fantasy lineup. If you need a good starter this week, I think Alex Smith is a good go-to here. Tyreek Hill, Travis Kelce should have some good matchups. And I look at Alex Smith as just a guy that he's going to get you some points. And he's also been in a lot of shootouts with the Chargers in the past. If this game turns into a shootout with Phillip Rivers, I think Alex Smith will be an excellent start this week. And my last quarterback start is Kirk Cousins of the Washington Redskins against the Oakland Raiders. Kirk Cousins is going to have his best game yet this season. He played the Rams. He played in week number 1 the Eagles. And he kind of redeemed himself last week against the Rams, as we saw the Rams defense doesn't look too hot. But Kirk Cousins, the Oakland Raiders, gave up a lot of yards against the Jets. I think Kirk Cousins will need to pass the ball a lot in this game to keep up with Derek Carr and that Oakland offense. This game is at home. This game is in prime time. I think Kirk Cousins has all the incentive to really show out in a shootout against Derek Carr and that offense. And I like the matchups that the Washington Redskins receivers have on the outside against these Oakland cornerbacks. So therefore, I'm going to start Kirk Cousins this week, and he's going to be in my fantasy lineup, and I'm going to count on him to put on some fantasy points for my team in what should be maybe even a game script that allows him to kind of up his statistical input this week. My quarterback sits, starting off with Marcus Mariota versus the Seattle Seahawks. The Seattle Seahawks defense is very, very good. We've seen it. Yes, their offense has lacked, but their defense has been there the first 2 weeks against a good offense like the Packers and a not so good offense against the 49ers. Marcus Mariota had a bounce back week last week, but wasn't so hot against the Raiders in week 1. This week, he's again at home. And for whatever reason, I don't really know what it is, but like at home, the Titans are worse than on the road. I don't know what it is, but anyways, they're playing a Seahawks defense. Defensive line is very, very tough. And yes, the Titans have a good offensive line, but I just don't see any matchups on the outside that really Marcus Mariota is going to be able to take advantage of in this game. He just doesn't have the upside this week. I think he'll still put up some decent points for you, but he's just not going to win you the week like some of these other guys have the potential of doing in my start category. So Marcus Mariota, if you have a better option than him at quarterback, but if he's only your one quarterback that you have on your roster, you could get away with starting him. I would just prefer to go with somebody else. As well as Russell Wilson versus the Tennessee Titans, I am not really starting Seahawks right now outside of maybe Chris Carson, and he's not even on my start on sit-em this week, but Russell Wilson, guys like, I mean, I guess you got to start Doug Baldwin, but this offense is just in shambles. It does not look good. This offensive line is atrocious. I don't know what the Seahawks offense is doing. I don't know if they're going to ever score over 10 points. It's just a sight to behold on how bad this offense has been. Against the Titans, I don't see how it's going to get any better, especially on the road. As I always say, bad offensive lines don't travel well, and that's certainly the case for the Seattle Seahawks. Russell Wilson's going to be running for his life with guys like Jarrell Casey, Brian Orakpo, and Derek Morgan coming after him. This isn't the week for Russell Wilson. Dak Prescott versus the Arizona Cardinals. The Cardinals' defense has been good. Despite their offense not being good, their defense has been good. Dak Prescott, on the other hand, has not been good. Dak Prescott has been bad against 2 good defenses thus far. He's played the Giants, good defense. He's played the Denver Broncos, great defense. Now he has the Arizona Cardinals in Arizona, a good defense. And I think that Arizona is just going to be able to force Dak into some poor situations. I don't see Dak having any advantages on the outside. I think Tyrann Mathieu is going to lock up Cole Beasley the same way that Chris Harris did. I think Patrick Peterson's going to lock up Dez, as has every corner in the NFL so far. And Dez just... This offense, passing-wise, is not explosive. They rely a lot on their running game, and if that running game is not there to work off that play action, which I don't think it will be 100% successful, Dak isn't going to have his best fantasy day. So for me, I think the Cowboys will be able to come out with a win in this game, but I think that Dak just isn't going to have the best game ever in this one, and I think you should sit him. Tyrod Taylor is playing the Denver Broncos no-fly zone defense. Do I need to say anything more? Look at what the Broncos did to Dak Prescott last week. Yes, this is at home, but Tyrod Taylor really has no targets to choose from. LaShawn McCoy, good runner. Charles Clay, a decent tight end, but at the receiver position, I mean, no rapport with Jordan Matthews, a rookie in Zay Jones. These guys are going to be locked down by Talib, Chris Harris, Bradley Roby, and company. This secondary is way too good. Von Miller is going to be in the backfield all game long. Tyrod Taylor is an obvious sit this week. Carson Wentz versus the New York Giants. The New York Giants defense, again, very much like the Cardinals, good defense, bad offense. That means bad result. Same as the Seattle Seahawks. Carson Wentz, last week, got a lot of points from really chipping away at the end of the game. He also got some points running the ball, which was interesting, and I would really look at that going forward. But Carson Wentz, I think, is a good quarterback to have on your team. He's a good quarterback to have. He seems to have improved year two. He has a lot more weapons, but the New York Giants defense is very good. It's very solid. Their defensive line is, I think, going to have a huge advantage against this Eagles offensive line, who hasn't looked as good as we thought previously coming into the season. Again, Carson Wentz has no run game to speak of, and he won't in this game, forcing all of the passes on Carson Wentz. I think there's going to be too much pressure on him. The corners of the Giants are good. They'll be able to match up with these receivers, and I just don't see Carson Wentz, again, having a lot of upside in this game, and probably going to maybe throw a pick or two in this game. I think this is a divisional matchup that will be a very close game. I do think the Eagles should come out with this win at home, but Carson Wentz having a big fantasy day is just a no for me. My running back starts this week in week number 3, James White versus the Houston Texans. I really like James White this week, especially, of course, in PPR leagues. But James White is going to have most of the snaps, I believe, for against this defense. There's no Rex Burkhead this week, which means there's no guy to really compete in those passing downs. There's still Dion Lewis there, but they haven't played Dion Lewis a whole ton this year. James White is that go-to guy for Tom Brady at the running back position. Houston is very susceptible to the running back out of the backfield. They don't have linebackers that are very shifty. They don't really move well sideline to sideline. They're a 3-4 defense that relies a lot on the pass rush. Therefore, their pass rush is going to be slowed down by a lot of screens, a lot of throws to the running back, and that's exactly what New England's going to do, and they do it better than anyone else. James White's an excellent start this week. I don't see Mike Gillislee having a huge game. He might get a touchdown, of course, or two, but James White will have most of the work, I think, from 20 to 20. Christian McCaffrey versus the New Orleans Saints. We saw what James White did against the Saints. We saw what Rex Burkhead did against the Saints. Christian McCaffrey should have a similar impact if the Panthers are smart, and you have to throw in the fact that there's no Greg Olsen. They need a new go-to guy on third down and in short situations for Cam Newton in the passing game. Christian McCaffrey should be that guy. I think he's going to have an uptick in play in this game against the Saints, who's decent against the run, but they're very terrible against the pass. That means McCaffrey will be out there even more this week, I think, more than Jonathan Stewart, and I think McCaffrey should be able to have a couple touchdowns and a lot of snaps in this game. The Detroit Lions running backs versus the Atlanta Falcons. The Atlanta Falcons are basically allergic to covering anybody in the flat of their defense. They've given up the most passes to the running back position in the first 2 weeks. Theo Riddick should be an excellent start this week in PPR, and I think Amir Abdullah is a good start in either format. Abdullah is obviously the lead back. He gets a lot of the runs. He maybe even get a touchdown in this game, but I think both these guys will get a lot of catches, especially Theo Riddick. Theo Riddick, of course, has the advantage of playing later in the game if the Detroit Lions fall behind in this one, but I don't think that's what's going to happen. I think this game is going to stay balanced. I think it's going to stay close, and that means both of these running backs will be able to supply some fantasy points to your team. Remember, Atlanta poor against running backs out of the backfield, and that's why Detroit running backs are excellent in this matchup. Isaiah Crowell versus the Indianapolis Colts. If Crowell is going to be successful this season, he's going to have to be successful against the Colts. The Colts are just not a good defense and not a good team. Crowell needs to break out in this game. He needs to have a good game. He hasn't had a great season so far, but he should have a good game here. And looking at the Browns, if they're going to win this game, which a lot of people think they will, they're going to have to score points, right? So who's the guy that's going to score points for them? It's going to be Isaiah Crowell in the red zone, and that's why I'm starting him this week, especially in standard. Tariq Cohen versus the Pittsburgh Steelers. This is a PPR specific pick, very much like James White. I think the Pittsburgh Steelers will be winning this game and winning it pretty easily for most of the game. They might keep it a little close to the Bears, but I think Tariq Cohen will have a lot of work in the passing game. You also throw in the fact that Jordan Howard is hurt and banged up. I think that means more time for Cohen. And you look at the game script potential for this game. A lot of Tariq Cohen screens, a lot of Tariq Cohen on the backfield. Pittsburgh's defense, very much like the Texans that I brought up. 3-4 defense that doesn't move quite well outside of Ryan Shazier. I think Tariq Cohen can take advantage of that a lot in the passing game, and I think that's exactly what Mike Glennon will do without a lot of receivers to go to. My running back sits this week. I have Lamar Miller versus the New England Patriots. I think this is going to be a big week for the Patriots defense. They're at home. They want their revenge from week 1 where they got embarrassed on their home field. I think Lamar Miller will be the focus of their game plan and taking away the run game to force Deshaun Watson to beat them, and that's exactly what they're going to do. Lamar Miller won't have anywhere to run, so if you have a better person to start them. But if you have to start Lamar Miller and you don't have many other options, you can still start Lamar Miller because he gets a lot of carries, he gets a lot of catches, and he gets a lot of work and volume. But in terms of actual production from that volume, I think Lamar Miller is going to be a poor choice. So if you have someone better, like if you're deciding between Lamar Miller and Amir Abdullah, I would go Amir Abdullah. So that's just my opinion. Lamar Miller not going to have a good week this week against New England. The Saints running backs versus the Carolina Panthers. The Panthers defense has been absolutely unreal against running backs this year. They're great against the run game. They're susceptible a little to the pass, but as we see in Carolina's defense looks really, really good this year, and that's why they're 2-0. The Saints offense, though, hasn't looked great. It looked okay at times in both weeks, but never the Saints offense of old. Adrian Peterson, I've told you to drop him. Mark Ingram should be getting more carries soon enough. And I really like Alvin Kamara, but I just don't think this is a week for any of those guys to start. I don't see the upside of this matchup, especially being on the road in Carolina where the Saints offense isn't as good. The Washington running back, specifically Kelly, Fat Rob, and P. Ryan versus the Oakland Raiders. The Raiders defense quietly been very good against the run. They have a strong front seven. They're very big. They're strong, and I think unlike Washington's game plan last week against the Rams where they tried to run more, I think this week they'll try pass, and pass more, and that means that P. Ryan and Kelly won't be on the field. It will actually be Chris Thompson. You also look at the game script for this game. I think Oakland will be winning this one for a majority of the game, and that means that Chris Thompson will be in the game a lot more trying to catch the ball. So maybe a sneaky flex start is Chris Thompson in a PPR league, but P. Ryan and Kelly are not starts for me this week. Jordan Howard versus the Pittsburgh Steelers. I brought up why I like Tariq Cohen. It's the same reason why I don't like Jordan Howard. There's not going to be a lot of running in this game for Chicago because Pittsburgh is going to take that away. That's their strong point on defense. And they're going to force you to pass because their offense is going to be scoring points. Jordan Howard has been banged up. He hasn't been getting a lot of the ball as opposed to last year. And I just look at this team and they're Tariq Cohen because they need to pass. So Jordan Howard is sitting for me this week. Jacquizz Rodgers versus the Minnesota Vikings. I really like that Minnesota front. We saw what it could do against Le'Veon Bell. And we saw what it could do week 1 against the Saints runners. Jacquizz Rodgers had a pretty good game last week against the Bears, but I don't see Jacquizz Rodgers having a good week this week. I think this is going to be a passing game plan for Tampa Bay. I think they're going to focus a lot in that regard, and I don't see Jacquizz Rodgers being, he's another guy like Lamar Miller. a guy with some volume that you can start because of volume, but don't expect a ton of production from that volume. My wide receiver starts this week, starting off with Deshaun Jackson versus the Minnesota Vikings. Looking at the Vikings defense, they typically put Xavier Rhodes on the best receiver that the other team has to offer, and that best receiver is Mike Evans, and Deshaun Jackson isn't the best receiver. But what he will have is he'll be facing Trey Waynes. Trey Waynes is not a very good corner. He's very fast, but he's not very good. He takes a lot of pass interference penalties, so maybe Deshaun Jackson will just be interfered on all game, and that doesn't really count for fantasy points. But hopefully Deshaun Jackson can get behind him a couple of times, maybe catch a long bomb touchdown. And I think that's what's going to happen. I think Jameis Winston's going to focus attention to that matchup, which a lot of teams really do. And Deshaun Jackson should have a field day against Trey Waynes and this defense and this secondary when Xavier Rhodes is covering Mike Evans. Now, this is a shocker for a lot of people, but I'm starting T.Y. Hilton against the Cleveland Browns. A lot of people disliking T.Y. Hilton this week, not liking T.Y. Hilton because of Andrew Luck, but he plays the Cleveland Browns, guys. The Cleveland Browns, okay? If you need to start T.Y. Hilton because you drafted him in the second or third round and you need him to start at receiver because you don't have good depth, start T.Y. Hilton. He plays the Cleveland Browns. There's no one on this team that can cover him. Jacoby Brissett will have a couple of times where he throws to him deep, and if T.Y. Hilton catches one of those, it's good for you. I mean, like, he could, in a standard league especially, all you need is one touchdown, like that 60-yard touchdown, and you're good. I mean, especially standard, I would start him, and you're taking that chance of the Cleveland defense just not being great, because it's not. And Jacoby Brissett didn't look all that bad. He looked a lot better than Scott Tolzien. So, T.Y. Hilton, I would start. If you're in need of a receiver, start him. Larry Fitzgerald versus the Dallas Cowboys. Larry Fitzgerald has not looked good this year. A lot of that has to do with his quarterback. But against the Dallas Cowboys, their secondary is garbo. We saw what Emmanuel Sanders and Demaryius Thomas both did to them. Larry is a slot receiver. I think he'll be able to take advantage of the Dallas Cowboys corners. He's too big, too strong. I don't see Dallas being able to match up well with him. He's such a savvy route runner. I think Carson Palmer is going to hit him maybe one or two times in the red zone, hopefully for touchdowns, and that will be a good start for you. Larry Fitzgerald against the Dallas Cowboys. Jarvis Landry versus the New York Jets. Jarvis Landry really showed off his high target volume from Jay Cutler last week. They seem to have good rapport. This week, Devontae Parker's been banged up in practice, so that means even more targets for Jarvis Landry and also Kenny Stills, too. But Jarvis Landry should have a field day against a Jets secondary that just isn't good, especially their slot corner, which really they've never been good with. So Jarvis Landry should have a field day, and you could even maybe expect a touchdown from a guy that doesn't score a lot of touchdowns because the Dolphins should be winning this game pretty easily. Golden Tate versus the Atlanta Falcons. The Atlanta Falcons have given up a lot of yards to slot corners in the past, and I think that Golden Tate will have a good day this week. Desmond Trufant is the number one corner for Atlanta. He lines up on the outside. He'll probably be taking Marvin Jones. Golden Tate should have a favorable matchup in the inside against Atlanta. This game should be a shootout, and I expect Golden Tate to get back on track this week after a rough week against DRC. Wide receiver sits DeAndre Hopkins versus New England. I think Stephon Gilmore is the perfect corner to cover DeAndre Hopkins. He's tall, he's tough, he's physical, he's long, and DeAndre Hopkins doesn't create a ton of separation in man-to-man coverage. He relies a lot on physicality and savviness to get open. Deshaun Watson will force him the ball a lot, and if you really need, if you need to start him because you don't have much else, start him. But I'm just saying this isn't going to be a good week for the Texans offense, especially DeAndre Hopkins, who that's the Patriots' strength on defense. Even if their defense as a whole hasn't looked fantastic thus far this season and they're still finding their identity, what they do have is two good cover corners on the outside, and even Eric Rowe is pretty good, to be honest. DeAndre Hopkins is going to be shut down in this game. He'll be covered by Gilmore and maybe even McCourty, and that's not a good sign for the Texans or Hopkins. Jeremy Maclin versus the Jacksonville Jaguars. The Jaguars, what they do have is good corners. They'll take away Maclin, who's been a touchdown-reliant receiver the first 2 weeks of the season. This just isn't a good matchup for him, facing two of the best corners in the NFL. I don't see it happening. Joe Flacco, this will be a very defensive game. This game's played in London. It's going to be interesting to see how Maclin, kind of an older receiver, will adjust to that. But I just don't see Maclin, having a ton of upside in this matchup. Dez Bryant versus the Arizona Cardinals. It's Dez Bryant versus Patrick Peterson. Dez has struggled mightily against top corners. He, in week number 1, of course, got bullied by Janoris Jenkins. And last week got bullied against Aqib Talib. So this week, I don't see him really doing much against Patrick Peterson. I think that Dak will try and go elsewhere. And I just don't see Dez being a great option. The Jaguars wide receivers versus the Baltimore Ravens. Baltimore Ravens defense has been superb through 2 weeks. Yes, Allen Hurns and Marquise Lee were both good, respectable options in fantasy last week, and I expect them to be in the future. But against Baltimore, a top-tier defense, they're not going to have much to go for. This is just not a good matchup for any Jags players, including their receivers. Baltimore's been all over every team's receivers. Their secondary is tough. You got to deal with Eric Weddle and Jefferson over the middle hitting you. You got to deal with some tough, big corners on the outside. And Baltimore's defense is scary. Stephon Diggs versus the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. I'm a huge Diggs fan, but without Sam Bradford, it doesn't look as great for Stephon Diggs. Actually, the better start of the Vikings receivers is Adam Thielen, due to the fact Case Keenum went to him more often in last week, and Tampa Bay does struggle at the slot corner position, but Stephon Diggs will have one of the better corners on him from the Vikings, or from the Bucs, sorry. And Stephon Diggs, he relies a lot on explosiveness and down the field plays in this offense, and it just won't happen with Case Keenum at quarterback. My tight end starting off with Ben Watson. Jacksonville has very good corners, but again is susceptible to the tight end position. Ben Watson really showed off that he is that target for Baltimore. 8 receptions last week, 90 yards. This week, you should expect a lot of targets against the Jacksonville linebacking core. That is good, but they have shown susceptibility to tight ends. Hunter Henry versus the Kansas City Chiefs. Without Eric Berry, Zach Ertz looked really, 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 really good last week against Kansas City. Hunter Henry, I expect the very same thing. We've also seen an uptick in snaps since Antonio Gates has caught that touchdown to get him the record. And I think Hunter Henry is more of a vocal point of the offense now. So therefore, I think he'll have a good matchup against Kansas City, and they'll probably be avoiding the Marcus Peters matchup, meaning that they'll be going towards the middle of the field a little bit more and to Hunter Henry. Jack Doyle versus the Cleveland Browns. Jack Doyle has been the favorite target of Jacoby Brissett thus far. I think this week that remains the same thing, and Cleveland just not a good defense. Again, I don't see why the Colts options aren't startable this week, because they are. And especially Jack Doyle, who's a safe option, and there's not a lot of tight ends out there to really start. So in PPR especially, I would start Jack Doyle. Jared Cook versus the Washington Redskins. Jared Cook has played 75% of the snaps for the Raiders, which is a pretty good number considering Jared Cook on Green Bay and stuff like that didn't play a lot. But Derek Carr seems to like him. Washington hasn't been good against tight ends. I think this is a good matchup. I think that Oakland will be looking for him in the red zone, and mostly because Josh Norman will be taking one of those receiver options away. Most likely Michael Crabtree, I actually think, because he matches up better with him, and Michael Crabtree is that red zone option. So I think the second guy, is Jared Cook in that red zone. He's big, he's able to catch inside, and I think Jared Cook might get a touchdown or two in this game against the Redskins. Charles Clay versus the Denver Broncos. Denver gave up a lot of yards and targets to Jason Witten. And when the Buffalo Bills are trying to come back in this game, which I think they will be, even if it's close, I think Charles Clay will get a lot of work and a lot of looks, because Tyrod Taylor will be trying his hardest to avoid Talib and Chris Harris in this game. The tight end sits. Starting off with Antonio Gates versus Kansas City. He just hasn't played a lot since he broke that record. Hunter Henry, this is now his offense. He is the second tight end now, Antonio Gates. And yeah, he might get a touchdown every once in a while, but I just think Hunter Henry is the guy right now. Julius Thomas versus the New York Jets. The Jets do have a pretty good young safety in Jamal Adams. Jamal Adams really, really good. I just don't see Julius Thomas having a good matchup in this one. I think Devontae Parker, Jarvis Landry, and Kenny Stills will have better weeks. Jimmy Graham versus the Tennessee Titans, just not startable right now. He's gotten no targets, no catches, no yards, no touchdowns. The Titans aren't bad and aren't a bad defense. I expect the Titans front to control that offensive line, meaning that Jimmy Graham down the field won't be very much of an option, and he'll probably having to stay in to block some more. So I think Jimmy Graham, not a good start this week. And just all real Seahawks, not good starts. Eric Ebron versus the Atlanta Falcons. Eric Ebron, he was good last week, but against Atlanta's a very fast defense. Eric Ebron is fast. That's kind of his thing at the tight end position. And, he won't be a terrible start, but I just don't think he's a good start. I think that Stafford will be looking for those running backs. He'll be looking for the slot receiver more than anything. And I don't see Eric Ebron having a lot of targets in this game. I've actually liked what Atlanta's done against tight ends so far this season. Martellus Bennett only got garbage points, and I expect this game to be a lot closer than the Green Bay game. So I don't see Eric Ebron being great in this game against Atlanta. So those are my starts and sits for week number 3 of the Fantasy Football 2017 season. Hope you guys enjoyed this video. If you did, subscribe to the channel if you're new. Always appreciate your subscriptions. We have a lot of NFL content. Basically every single day we have a video, whether it's a discussion, a review, a recap, a preview, a prediction video, or a fantasy video. So make sure you check that out. And like the video, Gronk spike it for more NFL, WWE, sports in general. It's Mitch of the Bottom Line View. Peace out.